It's very simple. Just follow my hands. So let's see all up here. Up here. For the hard of hearing, up here.
Oh.
All right, when I clap, you clap. Now, I want to say, some of the older folk have a problem with following instruction. Let's try it again. All right, when I clap, you clap. Yeah, I see a few hands moving. Okay, let's try it again. One more time now. When I clap, you'll clap. Oh, thank goodness for that. And try again. Okay, and it's obviously going to be a work in progress. We'll come back to this a little later on. You can sit down. Give yourselves a round of whatever you consider clapping. It's been a terrible week this week. I was at the grocery store the other day in the vegetable section, and an old lady walked up to the assistant there, and she said to him, "Excuse me, sir, do you have any broccoli?" And the assistant was very polite. He said, "No, I'm very sorry. The broccoli doesn't come in tomorrow." And I started talking to him just about vegetables in general. She went away, came back about 15 minutes later, and said to the assistant, "Excuse me, sir, do you have any broccoli?" He said, "Ma'am, I think I explained to you a short while ago, the broccoli doesn't come in till Wednesday." She went away a bit even more miffed than she was the second and first time. Third time came back again and said, "Excuse me, sir, do you have any broccoli?" He said, "Ma'am, can you spell?" She said, "Yes." He says, "How do you spell cat?" She said, C-A-T. He said, "Very good." He says, "How do you spell dog in dogmatic?" So the woman goes, D-O-G. She says, and he said, looked at her again. He said, "How many F's are there in broccoli?" She says, "There's no F in broccoli." He says, "Exactly." Okay. Moving right along. So I was up on the top floor of the Fontainebleau Hotel on Wednesday, and I went down a couple of floors, and who gets in the elevator? The lady that was at the grocery store the previous day. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be interesting. So we go down a few more floors, and a very well-dressed woman gets into the elevator, and the old lady remarks, "That's a very nice fragrance you have on. What is it?" And the woman was a bit of a snort. She said, "Oh, it's Dolce Gabbana. It's $500 an ounce." The woman says, "It's very nice." We go down another 10 floors, and an equally well-dressed lady gets in, and the old lady remarks, "That's a very nice fragrance you have. What is it?" She says, "A Chanel No. 5. It's $1,000 an ounce." The woman says, "Oh, very nice." Just before we hit the ground floor, the old lady farts. Turns around to the other two, and she says, "That's broccoli, 59 cents a pound." My job here this evening, Madam Toastmaster, our guest, fellow Toastmasters, is to try and connect with you. So you've just seen one or two ways to do it. Over the years, I've made many presentations in here, in competitions, and just generally in the world at large. One of the first large presentations I ever made was for an accounting federation. I got a phone call from a company in Georgia who said, "Would you mind doing a CE class, 2 of them, 1 hour each, for an accounting conference in Las Vegas?" It was over on East Trop. I said, "Sure, not a problem. There's a hotel. We're going to pay you. It's not free." I said, "No, we're good or bad?" I think to myself, how am I going to connect with a room full of accountants? So there was the first group, I think it was 100, and then there was another group, a different 100. So I went in and I said, "Well, this is going to be a challenge. You know, I could stand there and talk about facts and figures." And then I said, "Who has a problem with sharpening number 2 pencils?" And a couple of hands goes up. I said, "Because I have number 2 pencils at the house, and they never seem to come to a point." I found one guy that had put his hand up, and there was my connection to connect with the audience. And from then on, for the hour class, we kind of had a little bit of rapport, and people enjoyed it at the end. The second class, that was like more or less, it wasn't accountants, like being in a mall convention. They just sat there, and you get feedback. They fill out a "how did you do" comment card at the end, and they send it into this company in Georgia, and you get feedback. And they sent me a letter, said, "Thank you very much, here's your check. And by the way, you scored a 9.4 out of 10 for the 2 presentations you made. And we know who the people who made negative comments about you, because every time we do this, they do the same thing. So don't feel it was you. You did a very good job." I said, "Great." It's difficult to talk to professionals about a subject that is very dour. Let's face it, accounting is what? Sitting there with a calculator, a pencil, and a bunch of stats that you have to put into place and make coherent. But to be able to connect with just one person, you get to win the room over. So fast forward a few years later, I was asked to do a speech here at the Blind Center. I've got to talk to a group of blind people. And the person that invited me to come do that presentation thought, he's never going to pull this off. It's impossible. How's he going to connect with a group of people that can barely see and make it interesting for them for however long they wanted me to do the presentation? What the individual invited me didn't know is I own an art collection, a pretty large one. And I went through the collection and I found all the pieces that blind people could touch, feel, if they couldn't necessarily see. And I set up a display in the meeting room that I was put in, and some of the items were flat, but they had bumps on them, so they could see what it was. There were florets, there were tiles, there were all sorts of interesting things. Some had Indians on it. I had a piece that was, it was a tile, it was about this big. It was an Italian scene a friend of mine was producing. I had another piece of brass, it was about this, had an Indian or horse on it. All things, and a few other items too. Gave the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, the person inviting me said, I don't believe you just pulled this off. He said, I just spoke to the director of the center. They said they couldn't be more thrilled. This is the first time their group has been able to have a presentation and be involved, not just sitting there listening. I left each one of the individuals that was in the room a piece of artwork that they could take with them or put them in their room or wherever they were coming or going from. Obviously the more expensive pieces I took back. But I was able to connect with a group of people that couldn't see. Very difficult. Akin to that, I was traveling down the 10 freeway in LA one morning going to the Museum of Contemporary Art. I ran a restaurant down there and was behind a yellow bus where two individuals were doing sign language. Two young girls, 10 and 11 maybe. So the bus pulls to a stop on the freeway and I'm behind them. And I see them doing this and then they turn around and all I did was this and this and this. They signed back, thank you. Their faces lit up. So it doesn't matter where you are, you can connect. You don't necessarily have to speak to a person in order to connect with them, as we have found out in this room on many occasions. There was another occasion, so I'm giving you ideas of how you can connect with different groups at different times. I am, as you've heard in parties and whatnot, I'm very psychic. Extremely. I know when something's going to happen before it happens, or I find things when people have lost them, and the list goes on. I was working in a restaurant here on Jones and Sahara, and it's not there anymore. Jeffrey's in Chicago. This couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harris, came in on a Monday evening. Gruff old codger. He was in the used car business, and his wife would have a couple of drinks, and she'd open up a little bit. But on this Monday. She was very distraught. I said, what's the matter, Mrs. Harris? You seem very upset. I've lost one of my favorite rings. I went away, I put their order in, I got them some drinks, and I came back and I said, I'll make you an offer. And the husband's sitting there goes, oh, here's going to be expensive. I said, well, maybe, maybe not. I said, if I find your ring, you come back here, pay for dinner, and give me $100. If I don't find your ring, I'll pay for dinner. You could order whatever you like. And we served lobsters, we had steaks, we had nice wines, everything. I said, you can run up whatever sort of tab you want. So I went away, I came back, I said to the lady, I said, in your bedroom, do you have a chest of drawers that goes up as opposed to going this way? She said, yes. I said, does it have two regular drawers and then a double drawer, which is actually a faux drawer, and you just pull out the bottom handle and then you get to your stuff? She said, yes. I said, you want a brown bag that like shoulder bag? She said, yes. I said, did it have one of those, flaps that comes over and you kind of clicks into a thing and it locks and everything concertinas together? I said, yeah. I said, does that bag have 3 different compartments in it? She goes, yeah, I think it does. I haven't used it in a while. I said, in the middle compartment on one of the flaps on the side, is there a zip and you could put something in it? She says, yes. I said, when you go home tonight, that's where your ring is. She says, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen that ring in quite a few years. I've given it up as lost. I looked at her husband and I said, well, this is either going to be a very expensive evening for me or a very expensive evening for you, because I'm either going to save you thousands of dollars of having to buy her another ring, or you're going to give me $200. Either way, one of us is going to win. Comes back about an hour later, slams $200 on the table. He says, you SOB. He says, it just cost me $200 for dinner. I said, I saved you a lot more finding that ring. She goes, how did you know? I said, well, just figured it out. Another time I had a radio show. Some of you might have heard it. Well, one person, I think he heard it, I'm not sure, because the batteries might have not been turned up. I don't know, he could have been sleeping. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And anyway, I had a couple of tarot readers on one day, and it's radio. How do you connect with an audience with tarot readers on a radio show? Anyway, we had a couple of people call in, and then one lady called in. She said, can the tarot reader tell me whether my dog is doing okay in heaven? So I said, well, she's shuffling her cards, but before I ask her what the result is, can you tell me how he died? So, lickety-split, she said, it stopped eating. So I said on live radio, I said, well, why didn't you push the bowl nearer to her mouth? Of course, the whole studio cracked up. They had to silence my mic because I was laughing so hard. The board guy he lost it. And the tarot readers were the first ones to gather themselves, and they put the sound back up again, and they gave an answer. The dog's fine, he's up in heaven, no problems, blah, blah, blah. It's radio, it's the blind, it's accounting. Each one of us has a subject that we can talk on. Each one of us has a funny incident in our lives that we tell over and over again. We just do, we know it. And we connect with a group of friends, or whether it's, I don't know, you're out in a bar and everybody's having a good time, you've had a couple of drinks. But you connect because of this story. It's whether it's funny, it's sad, or it's just a business story. You don't always have to make presentations in front of your audience to go, well, okay, well, we had 500 sales last year for life insurance. We're doing annuities this year. It's very, very slow. Bob's division is not cutting it. Frank, I don't know, we might have to let you go. It all comes down to you and how you connect and what you say. So we're going to give this one last chance. You can stay in your seats, follow my hands, especially Bobby, who always gets aggravated when we don't do this properly. Let's try this one more time, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Toastmasters and welcome guests. Follow me. We're doing well. We'll try it again. Oof. Madam Toastmaster.